Hello and welcome to the Supernatural Fandom Track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z. Martin, and today we're going to be talking about the non-canon canon of Supernatural anime. Didn't know Supernatural had anime? You're not alone, but we're going to tell you a little bit about what we found in watching the anime series, and maybe you'll be inspired to go out and find it for yourself. But first, I want to ask my co-host here to introduce herself. So Anne, take it away.
Hi, I'm Ann Wicker, and I'm a writer and editor and a big Supernatural fan, even though I came to the series much later than many people. And I was introduced to it by my nephew, which was kind of interesting. And I really have went completely down the rabbit hole. But it was Gail who introduced me to the Supernatural anime series, which is basically, for those of us who are not anime savvy, it's like a cartoon version of the show. And anyway,
I discovered it just kind of poking around on Amazon, and I had actually watched it on DVD before I realized that it was free on the CW Seed app. I don't know how long it'll be free out there, but right now, and for a while now, it has been free. There are 22 episodes, so it kind of covers season 1 and 2, sort of, kind of, but it throws some twists along the way. So the cool thing is, I think that there's enough that's familiar, but there are also some surprises that it throws in. And as Ann and I have often discussed when we do our watch parties, there's also something very interesting about seeing Supernatural through the filter of Japanese anime, which adds some interesting and I think sometimes unintended just unique things.
Well, it does, and it's not unlike, as we've also talked about, it's not unlike fan fiction in that it's filtered through somebody else's concept or perception of what went on in a normal episode. And many of the episodes in the anime are sort of, I mean, since they're only 25 minutes or something, they're condensed versions of some of the stories from the canon, but then there are also completely original stories. And some of the original stories, though, make use of characters we're familiar with. So it's one of those sort of homage, I guess, for lack of a better word, to the series. And I found it interesting. I think that at some point, what I would like to do is watch the real show, watch the real episode that the anime episode is based on, because sometimes it confuses me and I don't know which I'm remembering. But at the same time, it's really interesting, like you said, to see the filter and see the conception of Japanese anime artists about how they, I think you've pointed it out a number of times, how they interpret buildings is way different from actual buildings that we would be familiar with.
Yeah, it's interesting because Supernatural is quintessentially two guys in a car driving through the heartland. And it doesn't get more Norman Rockwell America than the Midwest. And yet there's always there's usually a big city vibe in the Supernatural anime. Much more densely populated cities. And for some reason, instead of little white clapboard churches, there are always these huge cathedrals that you just don't find in podunk America. So that's always kind of interesting to see how some of the Americana aspects get filtered through Japanese sensibilities. I mean, for the most part, they kind of get it right. I mean, I'm sure people have watched an awful lot of our movies to have a sense of how things are, even if they haven't visited. But
Right.
every now and then there's something that goes, you're not from around here, are you?
Absolutely. And it's also interesting the way they've interpreted the characters, and we need to mention to people that in the anime series, Jared does the voice of Sam, but Jensen does not do the voice of Dean until the last 2 episodes? And so it's a little bit of a disconnect in my head when I don't hear I hear Sam's voice, but I don't hear Dean's voice. But the guy who does Dean is quite good. And some of the other characterizations, the characterization of Bobby bothers me a lot. I'm sorry.
We'll get to that.
Just,
yeah.
You know, it's not unpleasant. It's just not Bobby that I love.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, and I think Jensen had some sort of professional conflict schedule-wise that he couldn't do the first ones, because in the DVD version, Jensen and Jared come on the beginning of maybe all but one of the episodes together. And these came out around the time of season 10. And they both introduce the episode in live action. You know, so they're both standing there saying, well, this week's episode, and it's them live. I think there's one time Jensen wasn't there. So I don't know if this was around the birth of his kids or if he was, you know, one of the times he was doing a movie, but there's definitely something there, because it's not like him to miss this.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that, and I'll just touch on this since I know you've said you haven't watched quite as much anime. I'm certainly not nearly as anime literate as my adult children. I've joked for a long time that I always knew it was Christmas break from college when I heard people shouting in Japanese in my family room because the kids would all come home and watch anime. Now it's shouting in Korean for K-dramas. But I have watched enough of it to understand kind of some of the conventions and some of the tropes. And I think Ann and I have talked a lot of times that the women tend to be a little on the giggly side, and screechy voices and schoolgirl Lolita kind of outfits, which gets very grating. And if they're competent, then they tend to be much more androgynous. So I'm thinking of the one with the sister who was a cop and was, you know, and so I've noticed if you're female and not competent, or the victim, you get to be giggly and screechy. If you're female and competent, then you're androgynous, which is sort of weird, and I think sort of cultural. The other thing that I definitely see is that Sam is drawn very much in the yaoi side of things, which tends to be a subset of manga and anime that tends to be male-male romance, especially with guys who are in their early 20s or maybe late teens. And so just the way Sam is drawn, which has kind of in real life, he's a very good looking guy, but I would not characterize him as looking feminine, girlish, even when he was young. Mm-hmm. And he's drawn much more in that convention. Again, if you've ever seen yaoi, you're going to look at it and go, yeah, that's it. Which, again, interesting, because there's absolutely none of that in the anime. I'm not even sure Dean goes off with anybody in the anime nearly as much as he does in the real life. So just some things, if you're familiar with anime, you're going to notice it does follow the tropes for how you draw, how anime is drawn. for good or bad. But yeah, let's talk about how some of the other characters are envisioned, because Bobby, wow.
He's wearing, first of all, he's wearing the wrong hat. You know, they've got him in this sort of fedora slouch hat thing, which is not our Bobby. And it should be a baseball cap, but whatever. And he's sort of a lot chunkier and a lot more growly voiced, I guess. But I mean, the character is not bad. It's just not the Bobby that you're used to from the regular series.
It always reminds me of Danny DeVito.
A little bit.
And he's got a helicopter.
Yeah, he's got a helicopter. Who knew?
Boy, where was that when the boys needed it before?
I know, really. And then the other main character that's been in a number of these episodes is John Winchester. And, you know, I happen to think that Jeffrey Dean Morgan is a really good looking man. And they've made John Winchester into more of a, almost more of a Vincent Pricey kind of guy in a way, you know, not classy like Vincent Price could be, but that sort of demeanor with the goatee, kind of mustache and goatee kind of thing going on. And I don't know. And of course his voice is really growly too. Not in a bad way. I mean, it works. But he's at the same time, you know, he's always ordering Dean around, which that's the same. But I don't know. Those are the two standouts that are so very different in appearance and in some ways in the way they conduct themselves in the anime.
I'd say the John Winchester in the anime, just with the long coat and the facial features, like you mentioned, almost comes off like a hard-boiled detective from the noir genre. You know, he's gruff to the point of abrasive. He doesn't have the moments of likability or vulnerability that John has in the real series.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You don't really get that even in their take on episodes like In My Time of Dying, where you really did see some of that with Jeffrey Dean Morgan. Mm-hmm. I think the one that fascinates me, though, is their concept on Missouri Mosley, who shows up a lot more in the anime than she got to show up in the live action. She is really a favorite character, and she has had a much more longer and much more exciting life in fan fiction because her character is used a lot in fan fiction stories. But Missouri's African-American as a real person in the show. And of course, this is Japanese anime. And this is where I think one of the biggest anime tropes comes out, because if you've ever seen something like Howl's Moving Castle, the old woman witch figure has the very short, stumpy body and lots of jewelry and kind of weird hair. And it's very much an anime archetype. And Missouri, to me, resembles that archetype much more than she looks African-American. She just doesn't. It's a very different concept of the character.
Well, it really is. And frankly, the first time I saw her in the anime, I didn't know who it was until they said her name.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was like, who is that? Why is Dean crying in front of her? You know, I was totally confused by that, because I'm one of these people that I've never watched anime.
Mhm.
So I don't know about the tropes of anime, but it makes sense that they would use that trope of the witch woman and make her into that. It makes sense to do that in their vision of what's going on. But I have to say, yeah, I didn't know who it was.
Yeah. And I think you're right. She and Bobby are the biggest departure from what we're used to seeing them as. Um, and then of course, John in the long duster as opposed to his leather jacket, has much more of that other vibe. But it's interesting because some of the stories get re-envisioned too. What were some of the surprises for you?
Oh, I think the story that had to do with Meg's backstory,
Mm-hmm.
um, because I was following this story about this young girl, and they called her Megan or something, but it was a lot about her mother, which is not part of the
Mm-mm.
normal canon at all. But there was a lot about her mother, and toward the end of the episode, I just went, Meg, oh Meg, and that she would become a demon and or go to the dark side, as we say, and but yeah, that surprised me. That was one of the things but it was kind of nice to see this backstory of this young girl and her issues. Now I can't really remember what they were, but it was interesting that then that developed into, oh yeah, Meg. Now we know where Meg came from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought that was surprising and also really good. Once you realized what you were looking at, going, oh, okay, that
Yeah.
kind of filled in a hole.
Yeah.
There was another one that was really more original for anime with a guy who was a vampire trying to protect his son who was going to be coming into his vampirism. It was really more of a, you kind of got to be a vampire when you hit puberty sort of thing.
Right,
And
right.
he was trying to protect his son, and the Winchesters were hunting him, and the kid got in the way. And it becomes one of those, well, you haven't killed anybody yet, but how do I know you're not going to, moral dilemmas for the Winchesters.
Yeah. And yeah, and that goes along well. I mean, we've seen that with the original episode of what was it? I forget the name of the episode, but the three kids, the
Mm-hmm.
three college kids, and then they let the young woman go because, you know, they don't hunt her down because they think she's not going to kill anybody. And of course, that comes back to bite them in the butt later. But, and also with letting Garth be a werewolf, um, with his werewolf family. And they've made that moral decision a number of times, and but not necessarily with a vampire child before, I don't think.
No, not really.
And that was a different twist on vampires too, with having a vampire be born a vampire,
Mm-hmm.
basically. And in all the vampire literature I've read, they're always bitten.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think one of the other, you talked about Meg's backstory, but we also had an anime episode where we saw more of Sam meeting Jessica and them on campus at the college, and more of their backstory as a couple, because we never really saw their relationship other than that very brief snippet at the beginning of the pilot. And this kind of fleshed it out a little more, kind of gave you more of an idea of what Sam was like. And I think it's actually, if I'm remembering correctly, it's the Dean is remembering doing a drive-by of Stanford when Sam was on campus, and Sam didn't realize Dean was there. So we're seeing Sam through Dean's eyes at a distance when Dean's kind of checking in on him. And then at the end, Sam hears the rumble of the Impala and turns, but the car's already out of sight.
Right.
And that's something, there's a whole, niche of Stanford era fan fiction.
Oh yeah. Yeah. But we don't see any of that in canon, as they say, as we say. But yeah, and that does fill in another hole of the backstory of Jessica and Sam, and the whole Stanford era.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then there are some of the episodes where they are very familiar, but still different. And the one that we talked about with the sister who was the cop, it was sort of a phantom traveler, sort of a woman in white concept of having sort of a ghost truck.
Right.
There was another black Impala that was running cars off the road and killing people. And originally they, the powers that be thought it was Sam and Dean, but it turned out to be one of those I know what you did last summer kind of things.
Yeah. And some of the I was trying to remember, again, I think that it would help, that I would enjoy picking out, like, what was the one we watched Saturday, Crossroad?
Yeah.
And that was very close. A lot of that one was very close to canon, but in that one and then in another one that was really close to canon that we watched a couple of weeks ago, I kept thinking, this is so familiar, but yet there was something different about it, because it was almost like I felt like I'd seen it before. Mm-hmm. But then it was just enough different that I was, oh yeah, okay. But I would definitely think that that an interesting watch party kind of thing might be to, or at least I have a discussion going on where you watch the original story and then you watch the anime.
Yeah. And I think we also get more, we've had several episodes that give us more of the boys' backstory when they were children, to get more of an idea of some of the things that shaped them when John wasn't necessarily around.
Mm-hmm.
But as you said, then some of them are very, very close to canon. One of the ones that I really liked that is completely different, and I think also very Japanese, as we talked about at the time, is the one where they go to Vegas and Dean gets spelled by a luck demon who is kind of like this little malicious Yoda guy on his shoulder who initially gives people good luck and then takes it away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, that was a really interesting one. And to see their concept of Vegas was really interesting.
Yeah, and they end up foiling a casino heist, and then in the end they foist the cursed coin off on the bad guys, who then that causes their heist to go awry. But yeah, the conception of Vegas, and then just the little guy, the little demon, is so very very much straight out of the Asian mythology, because he's this little old giggling guy who just, he's full of mirthful, he's full of glee, but it's malicious. And I thought that was just a really interesting one.
Yeah, and it's so different from both our concept of demons in America or the concept of demons on the show being,
mm-hmm.
the souls from hell or whatever who inhabit the earthly meat suits.
Well,
And
it's almost more of an imp or a,
right.
it isn't a demon like Crowley or like some of the ones, like you said. It's much more of almost, I think we'd probably term it more of a leprechaun or a fae kind of creature.
Yeah. Or an imp.
Mm.
I think imp is a really good word for that, because, you know, an imp, at least in most mythology that I'm familiar with, an imp, it really is usually mischievous or bad. And so, fae doesn't have to mean bad. It can also mean somebody good. And, um, you know, yeah. Yeah,
One
that's
of
it.
the, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just said that was, it's interesting because I didn't really, I don't know that much about Japanese mythology.
Um, yeah, he always kind of reminded me of sort of a Japanese take on a leprechaun where,
Yeah.
you know, you get in trouble by being greedy and then getting what you asked for in a sort of twisted way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, one of the other ones that's another complete break from canon is one called Rising Sun, which is where John hires basically a nanny or a housekeeper to help with the boys. And she's a young woman. Sam becomes very attached to her. He's never really had a mother figure before. Dean, of course, is very suspicious because he doesn't want anybody near Sammy, and you're not my mom. And then it turns out badly because it ends up that she was a demon trying to get to Sam. But that was a very interesting take because in canon, John just basically leaves them alone, gives Dean $40 to feed Sam for the week, and here's some salt. Shoot anything that comes through the door.
Yeah. And yeah, and I think she was Sam's teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And then she started coming over and I mean, they show her in the story, they show her cooking and generally being a mom thing, doing the mom thing. And at first I thought she was trying to get to John.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's sort of the implication. But yeah, Dean is totally suspicious, and rightly so.
Now, one of the other ones, and Anne, I'm not sure if this is one we've watched together, but if not, it's coming up probably this weekend because we've been watching them. It's about my third trip through the series. It's your first.
Mm-hmm.
And that's great because then I see things new from what you're pointing out that really stuck out to you. I'm going to ruin this week's episode for you. But this one goes into Jake Talley's background. So Jake, of course, is the guy who stabs Sam in the back at Cold Oak.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And it really kind of combines, it's the run up to All Hell Breaks Loose, but it's seeing things from Jake's point of view. And Sam kind of has a premonition of what's going on, but it's mostly Jake's story with Sam and Dean trying to stop Jake from going dark side. Mm-hmm. But Jake has sympathetic reasons for wanting to win. And it's just like Sam and Dean have burned the world down for each other, the demon threatens Jake's family. And so if Jake doesn't come out the winner at Cold Oak, pretty little sister you had there, sure be a shame if anything happened to her.
Mm-hmm. Well, I seem to remember that but it was only briefly mentioned maybe not in the one where he stabs Sam, but in the next episode where he's actually dealing with the yellow-eyed demon and he doesn't really want to do what the demon wants him to do, and he does talk about that. But it's interesting to get that before. It would be interesting to have known that before he comes back and stabs Sam.
Yeah, I mean, we're still not going to like him because he stabbed Sam, but no. He had reasons for why he did what he did. He wasn't initially a bad person. He was doing the bad thing for a good reason.
Right. And I think that was a lot of what went on. I mean, going back to Canon, that was a lot of what went on with the the special children like Sam. Um,
Well, one
but
of the other ones that we get to see more of in the anime than we did in the canon was Lily. Now, she was the one who killed people by touching them and didn't find
mhm.
out that she had that talent until she'd already killed somebody. And she shows up on their radar, and the whole episode is them going after her, and or they don't know it's her at first, and she's kind of figuring this out, and then of course she escapes at the end because she shows up at Cold Oak. But it's much more intensive on her background than we get in the real series.
Mhm.
And I think there was one Ava showed up too, wasn't there?
What
Ava, the one who was the sympathetic one that Sam kind of trusted, and her boyfriend, her fiance died, and then she really ended up being the bad one.
yeah. Yeah, I don't maybe that's I think maybe I haven't seen that anime one yet. Maybe
Or
I
it might
have.
be further back.
Oh, okay. Um,
There's also one that I think is really interesting. Well, there were two others that were very different from canon. One was the doctor who started killing people for body parts to keep his wife alive because she had died back in the 40s, and she didn't know that she was dead, but he had to keep killing in order to keep her replenished. And it's sort of a twist on the doctor that Sam took Dean to when they were trying to fix Dean's heart. No, when they were trying to get Dean out of his deal, where he would live forever, but he'd have to keep getting replacement parts, and they end up
oh
locking.
yeah. The Billy Drago was
Mhm.
the doctor, and he had been killing people to replenish himself. Yeah.
And in
Yeah.
the anime version, it's a little more sympathetic, kind of, that he's killing people to keep
His wife.
his wife alive. And of course, she doesn't know anything about it. And when she finds out about it, she puts an end to it. But kind of a different twist on that story, little more sympathetic and a little less horrific.
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
one
that
was
was
a
a really
scary one.
yeah, that was a really scary sort of, almost Criminal Minds kind of thing where,
Mm.
he that guy was really around the bend.
And there was also one, The Temptation of the Demon, where you have somebody who's a very faithful religious woman, but her daughter's sick and prayer isn't getting her anywhere. So the demon offers to heal her daughter if she will do what he wants.
Mhm.
And same sort of thing, once the daughter figures out what's going on, she puts an end to it. But I think that's one thing with the anime that we saw more of, maybe even from the point of view of the people who made deals. In canon, Sam and Dean ride in at the very end and try to get somebody out of a deal the night before the Hellhounds come.
Mhm.
And we hear about them making their deal in the past. With
Mhm.
the anime, we are not bound to Sam and Dean's perspective as much. And so we often see from the person's point of view what the compelling issues were that drove them to making a demon deal, which makes
Mhm.
them more sympathetic.
Well, yeah, it does. It does. Because obviously canon, we're always supposed to be sympathetic with Sam and Dean or Cassiel.
Even when I love that one time in the episode with Aaron Bass and his golem, where you get this outsider perspective as Sam and Dean dig up a grave, salt and burn it. And I think that may be the one where Jared improvised by warming his hands over the flames as they rise from the grave. And Aaron just says to his golem, they're psychopaths. They're totally psychopaths. And you have this flash that, yeah, if we weren't riding along with their point of view, you just met them,
Yeah. Yeah.
you might come to that conclusion. But there
Oh
are
yeah.
some that we love them.
Yeah.
I picked up the one with Sam at Stanford, and that's Till Death Do Us Part, and it's actually kind of a mixture. It starts with being kind of a Bloody Mary story, but then it takes the Bloody Mary story to be happening at Stanford, and that's how it pulls Dean in, and how Sam ends up kind of tipping his hand to Jessica that he knows about some stuff he hasn't told her.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really interesting to see the relationship also that exists in anime. It's very similar. It's certainly very close to hitting all the right notes from the live action, but there's some differences. What have you noticed?
I don't think they don't seem as in sync to me.
Mm-hmm.
They don't seem quite as I'm not sure how to put this. They don't seem, while they seem to be they seem to work together just fine. It doesn't seem to be that Sam anticipates Dean, Dean anticipates Sam. Again, I go back to them being so in sync that they don't even have to even look at each other to know, you go high, I go low, we break into this place. It's, I mean, in Canon, they just do it. And it just doesn't quite hit that note in the anime to me.
Yeah.
They're, like I said, they certainly work together, but they don't mesh like they do on the show, as far as knowing, they seem to know what the other one is thinking, that kind of thing. And even when they fight on the show, on the anime, their fights are almost worse because you don't think they're getting it. Either one of them getting it, or able to understand the other one's point of view.
Yeah, they both show vulnerability. I mean, Dean breaks down, like you mentioned before, and the episode that we watched most recently is him dealing with the guilt over realizing that John made a deal for him, and then being taunted by the Crossroads demon when he goes to try to stop her from taking a guy who had made a deal for his wife, which was another mashup of Canon, but not quite, because
Right.
there is an episode like that, Crossroads, but it doesn't happen exactly that way. And the demon in that is really worse, I think, than in the live action, in terms of just getting him where he's very vulnerable.
Yeah.
But it's not quite the same. And maybe it's because, kind of contrasting the anime series, which didn't have Jensen in it until the last 2 episodes, and Scooby Natural, even though that's only 1 episode. I think we saw more of that relationship between the boys matching the live action in Scooby Natural than we do in the anime.
Oh yeah, I would totally agree with that. And it just, and again, it's probably the perspective. I would think it was the perspective of the Japanese, how the Japanese writers interpret their relationship and that sort of thing. It just, because, many people interpret that relationship in many ways, as we all know.
Yeah. And again, coming back to some of the other anime I've seen, there are definitely very strong archetypes for, this is the warrior archetype. This is the scholar slash visionary archetype. And I think the anime fits Sam and Dean a little more into those anime archetypes than we see in the live action show.
Right. Right.
Compounded by Jared's not playing off Jensen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even having just seen them at conventions, or if you've ever watched any of the con clips, they play off each other. They're better together.
Yeah, they are. And, you know, going off on another tangent, it's going to be really interesting to see either one of them play a totally different roles. I mean, I've watched 10-Inch Hero, Jensen's movie, and he's good in that movie, but he, you know, I really missed seeing him play off Jared. And we'll just have to wait and see what happens. I think Jensen's going to be good in The Boys.
Oh yeah,
even though that's really dark and stuff. But
both be good. But
yeah,
many actors have said, you know, there was that one role where everything just came together. And so while Jared and Jensen have their friendship and their chemistry, it's also everybody else around them that was just special. Jensen's called it lightning in a bottle, and it's they both know it's once in a lifetime.
Right.
But before we run out of time, I want to mention something that I never realized watching the anime, and you were the one who said, well, what about? And I went, really? It does that? And that's those little Easter eggs at the end of some of the episodes.
Yeah, it was one of those things where if you watch the anime, the episode will end and they'll play the credits with Carry On as the theme song. And then at least on CW Seed, there's usually a commercial. And then if you hang on through those commercials, then there's an epilogue or a postscript scene. And sometimes it ties up something, loose ends from that episode. And sometimes it launches you into what is the next episode. And that's a different way of doing it. Is that a trope or a concept that they do in anime?
I'm sure somebody will mention in the comments. I haven't. This is where, you know, my kids would know. My son watched all 350 episodes of the anime Bleach in 1 week. So, you know, they've got this. Yeah, they're not hour-long episodes, but that's still a lot, even by Supernatural viewing. Yeah. I'm not sure. It could be. I had never bothered to stick around after the credits, and you were the one who pointed it out. And not every episode has it.
No. And I was trying to remember. It seems to me that I'm a inveterate TV watcher from the time I was a kid, and my parents never censored what I watched. So, I mean, I watched Star Trek from the beginning, you know, that sort of thing. And it seems to me that was a thing back like in the 60s, that there were one or two maybe comedy shows that would have, and the credits would roll and there might be a commercial and then there'd be a blip. But it also harkens to the Marvel universe with the watch the credits and then there's a thing at the end.
Well, so, I know a show that comes on the CW before Supernatural, as we're watching these last 7 episodes at the moment, Blackish, at least it comes on our CW right before Supernatural, tends to do that, where you think the episode's over, because I have my recorder set to be like 10 or 15 minutes early so it doesn't lop off the beginning. So I end up seeing the last 5 minutes of the show, runs the credits, runs a set of commercials. You think you're going to go into a teaser for Supernatural, and you get this last minute or two conversation wrapping up a loose end from Blackish. So maybe what's old is new again.
Maybe so. I mean, I couldn't, I could do some research and maybe find out, but I cannot remember, but it seemed familiar. It seemed like a familiar thing when I first realized that they were doing that on the anime. Now you have the DVDs. So is that different on the DVDs?
I never stuck around to watch. So now I'm going to have to get the DVDs out and watch them and see if it's there after the credits. I just always, okay, the credits are over, on to the next thing. I've never let the anime just run all the way through like I have with the live action DVDs. Just when I was able to watch them, I kind of had to do them one at a time. And when we're talking about these extra scenes, they're only maybe a minute, maybe 2 minutes at most. They're very short, but they are like that last comment. The other thing that cracks me up when you're watching the credits is the sketches that show up during Carry On. One of them is Dean playing air guitar with his leg. But then there's this other one that just fascinates me, where they've got the Impala and Dean's in a lawn chair, and they've rigged up this sort of canopy with two supports and then almost like a beach towel that's anchored on top of the Impala, and Dean's sitting in a lawn chair under this. And it's like, wow, I'd really kind of like to know when that ever happened.
Yeah.
Because they look like they're in the middle of the desert. They don't even look like they're at a beach.
Yeah, well, yeah, I was going to say, it looks like there's a river or something. There's water, and they're parked beside of that. Yeah, that always, that one fascinates me too. Yeah.
But to me, it looks like something more you'd see in Texas or out west, as opposed to, it's not like there's the ocean.
No.
So yeah, all kinds of cool stuff. Well, believe it or not, we are out of time. But Anne, thank you so much for hashing this out with me.
Oh, well, this is fun to talk about it. And I really have enjoyed, like you said, doing our Saturday morning cartoons.
And just in a wrap-up comment, you mentioned having watched the original Star Trek. Star Trek did have an animated series on Saturday morning way back in the day. I think about 3 seasons of it. David Gerald wrote a lot of the tie-in novels that recap that, and I watched all of that when it first came out. And some of it was redoing classic episodes, and many of the episodes were different and new. So I do get some of that deja vu. I kind of like the way the Supernatural anime is drawn better. It's not quite so Hanna-Barbera. It's definitely anime.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But, I just had to throw that out there in the end. And while the anime is different, I mean, I'd recommend it definitely to people. Just know what you're getting when you go into it. It's not going to be exactly it, but you can enjoy it for what it is.
Oh yeah, and that's why I compare it to fan fiction, because it's just a different take on these characters and this world, and it's seen through that anime perspective.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So there you have it, folks. If you haven't watched Supernatural, the anime series, hey, it's 22 half-hour episodes, 11 hours of your life. What else are you doing with it? You can enjoy it for what it is, and just kind of add that in the back of your mind with all that other good Winchester lore. So thank you very much, Anne, for being with us tonight. And thank you, folks, for hanging out and talking about Supernatural. There'll be more Supernatural and fandom here in Continual. See you online.